"Get that woman off my plane. She doesn't belong in first class." Those 12 words were spoken by Captain Marcus Thorne, a 20-year veteran pilot for Stratosphere Airlines. He said them loudly, confidently, and with a smirk that suggested he was untouchable. He was looking at a woman named Alara Vance, who was wearing a hoodie, holding a cracked iPhone, and sitting quietly in seat 1A. Marcus thought he was protecting the airline's image. He thought he was asserting authority. But what Captain Thorne didn't know was that the woman he was humiliating wasn't just a passenger. She wasn't just a customer. She was the person who had signed his paycheck that morning. And by the time this flight lands, she would be the one signing his termination papers. This is the story of the most brutal instant karma in aviation history. The fluorescent lights of JFK's Terminal 4 hummed with that specific, anxiety-inducing frequency that only frequent flyers seem to notice. It was 6:45 a.m. on a rainy Tuesday in November. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the tarmac was a slick, gray mirror, reflecting the blinking red lights of ground crew vehicles. Alara Vance adjusted the hood of her oversized, charcoal gray sweatshirt. It was cashmere, technically, a $400 piece of loungewear, but to the untrained eye, it looked like something grabbed from a clearance rack at a thrift store. That was the point. She pulled her noise-canceling headphones down around her neck and took a sip of lukewarm airport coffee. It tasted like burnt hazelnuts and regret. Alara checked her watch. It was a vintage Cartier, but she had turned the face inward on her wrist, hiding the gold. She wasn't here to flash wealth. She was here on a mission. 3 days ago, the board of directors for Stratosphere Airlines, one of the oldest, most prestigious, and recently most troubled carriers in the Western Hemisphere, had voted unanimously to appoint Alara as the new CEO. She was 42, the first woman of color to hold the seat, and a ruthless efficiency expert known in Wall Street circles as the surgeon. She cut the rot to save the patient. But Stratosphere was rotting from the inside out. Customer satisfaction was at an all-time low. Stocks were dipping. There were rumors of a toxic culture among the senior flight staff. Arrogance, racism, and a dismissal of protocol that borders on negligence. Alara didn't want reports. She didn't want sanitized PowerPoint presentations from middle management. She wanted the truth. So, under the alias Elena V., she had booked a first-class ticket on Flight 882 from New York to London Heathrow. She wanted to see how the airline treated a black woman traveling alone who didn't look like she belonged in the front of the plane. Group 1 boarding now, the gate agent announced. Her voice was tired, lacking the sparkle the company manual required. Alara stood up. She grabbed her carry-on, a battered leather duffel bag that had seen better days. It contained her laptop, a change of clothes, and the encrypted hard drive containing the entire financial restructuring plan for the airline. She moved toward the lane marked Priority/First Class. The man standing in front of her was a caricature of business wealth, a beige trench coat, a Toomey roller bag, and a loud voice currently shouting into a Bluetooth earpiece about liquidating the assets. He glanced back at Alara. His eyes scanned her sneakers, her hoodie, her messy bun. He let out a short, derisive scoff and turned back around, effectively blocking the lane with his body. Alara didn't say a word. She just breathed in. This was exactly what she was here to document. But she had no idea that the passenger was the least of her problems. The real problem was currently sitting in the cockpit of the Boeing 777 parked at the gate. Captain Marcus Thorne. Captain Marcus Thorne checked his reflection in the cockpit instruments. At 55, he still had the jawline of a movie star and the silver fox hair that Stratosphere Airlines loved to put on their recruitment posters. He was the airline's golden boy. He had flown the inaugural flights for their new Dreamliners. He had been profiled in Aviation Weekly. He was also, according to the 3 pending HR complaints that the previous CEO had buried, a tyrant. Coffee, Captain? Marcus didn't turn around. He was busy texting his mistress in London. Is it fresh, Jessica? Or is it that sludge from the terminal? The flight attendant, a young woman named Jessica, who had only been flying for 6 months, hesitated. It's from the galley, sir, freshly brewed. Fine. Leave it. Don't touch the console. He finally turned, his ice-blue eyes narrowing at her. Marcus Thorne didn't see crew members as colleagues. He saw them as servants to his legacy. He believed that the pilots were the gods of the sky, and everyone else, passengers included, were merely lucky to be in his presence. "We have a full load today, Captain," the first officer, a quiet man named David Chen, said while reviewing the load sheet. "First class is fully booked. Economy is oversold by 5. "Great," Marcus muttered. "More cattle. Let's try to make up time in the air. I have a dinner reservation at the Shard at 8 p.m. If we get stuck in a holding pattern over Heathrow, I'm going to lose my table." This was Marcus Thorne's reality. The safety of the passengers was secondary to his dinner plans. The comfort of his crew was irrelevant compared to his coffee preferences. He stood up and stretched, brushing a piece of imaginary lint off his pristine navy blue uniform. The 4 gold stripes on his shoulder epaulets caught the light. "I'm going to do a visual check of the gate," Marcus said, grabbing his hat. "The gate agent, Greg, is an idiot. Last time he let a woman on with a support peacock. I'm not dealing with a zoo today." David Chen nodded, keeping his head down. He knew better than to argue with Thorne. Everyone knew the rumors. You cross Marcus Thorne, and you end up flying red-eyes to North Dakota for the rest of your career. Marcus stepped out of the cockpit, walked through the empty first-class cabin, smelling the expensive leather and the fresh orchids, and exited the aircraft door into the jet bridge. He liked to stand at the door during boarding. It intimidated the passengers. It made them remember who was in charge. He adjusted his hat, crossed his arms, and watched the passengers trickling down the ramp. The businessman in the beige trench coat walked past. "Good morning, Captain," the man said, nodding deferentially. "Welcome aboard, sir," Marcus said with a charming, practiced smile, smooth flying ahead. Then he saw her. Elara was walking down the jet bridge. To Marcus, she looked like an error, a glitch in his perfect matrix. Her hoodie was oversized. Her hair was natural and pulled back. She wasn't wearing makeup. In Marcus's world, black women who sat in first class dressed to the nines. They wore blazers, heels, and diamonds. They performed wealth to prove they belonged. This woman? She looked like she was heading to a bodega at 2 a.m. Marcus's smile vanished. His brow furrowed. He stepped forward, physically blocking the entrance to the aircraft. "Hold on," Marcus said, his voice booming in the confined space of the jet bridge. Elara stopped. She looked up. She knew exactly who he was. She had read his file. Captain Marcus Thorne. Salary, $320,000. Incidents, 4. Disciplinary actions, 0. "Good morning," Elara said, her voice calm, level, and polite. "Is there a problem?" Marcus looked her up and down, making a show of his disgust. "You're in the wrong line, sweetheart. Economy boarding is Group 4. You need to wait at the gate until they call your row." Elara didn't blink. "I'm in Group 1. I'm in Seat 1A. Marcus laughed. It was a dry, cruel sound. 1A? That's a $4,000 seat. Let's see the boarding pass. Elara pulled up the QR code on her phone. She held it out. Marcus didn't scan it. He didn't even look at the code. He looked at her screen, which had a crack in the corner. "I don't know how you got that ticket," Marcus sneered, leaning in closer, his breath smelling of mints and arrogance. "Employee standby. Did a boyfriend buy it for you with miles?" "Look, I run a tight ship. I don't want riffraff in my premium cabin disturbing the paying customers. Go back to the gate agent and get reassigned to the back where there's space." Elara felt the heat rise in her chest, but she clamped it down. This was the moment. This was the test. "I paid full fare for this ticket, Captain," Elara said, hardening her voice slightly. "And I intend to sit in the seat I paid for. You are blocking the boarding process." "I am the boarding process," Marcus snapped. Passengers behind Elara were starting to grumble. The line was stalled. "What's the holdup?" someone yelled from the back. Marcus raised a hand to silence the crowd, then turned his glare back to Elara. "You're not getting on this plane." "Not looking like that. Stratosphere has a dress code for first class." Actually, Elara corrected him. The dress code only applies to employees traveling on non-revenue passes. Paying customers have no dress code restrictions aside from offensive language or indecency. My hoodie is cashmere. My jeans are Saint Laurent. Now move." It was the now move that did it. Marcus Thorne had never been told to move by a woman, let alone a black woman in a hoodie, in his entire life. His face turned a shade of red that matched the tail fin of the plane. He clicked the radio on his shoulder. "Security to gate 42 immediately." "I have a disruptive passenger refusing crew instructions. I need her removed." The atmosphere in the jet bridge shifted instantly from annoyance to hostility. The word security acts like a match in a room full of gasoline fumes. "You called security?" Ilara asked, her eyebrows raising slightly. She wasn't scared. She was incredulous. She was watching a man dismantle his own career in real time, brick by brick. "You're a security threat," Marcus lied, his voice loud enough for the passengers behind her to hear. "You're aggressive, you're non-compliant, and I suspect that ticket is fraudulent. I'm not taking chances with my aircraft." A hush fell over the line. The businessman in the beige coat leaned forward. "She was acting a bit strange in the line," he chimed in, eager to align himself with authority. "She was just standing there watching everyone." Ilara looked at the businessman, then back at Marcus. "Captain, I am asking you one last time to check the manifest. Look at the name on the ticket, Ilara Vance." "I don't care if your name is Oprah Winfrey," Marcus spat. "You're off." 2 TSA agents and a Port Authority police officer came jogging down the jet bridge, pushing past the confused passengers. "What's the problem here, Captain?" the officer asked, breathless. "She's refusing to leave," Marcus said, pointing a manicured finger at Ilara. "She's aggressive. I want her trespassed." The officer looked at Ilara. He saw a calm, small woman standing with her hands visible. She didn't look aggressive. She looked bored. "Ma'am," the officer said, his tone cautious, "is this your flight?" "It is," Ilara said. "I have a valid boarding pass for seat 1A. The captain is refusing me boarding based on my appearance." "She's refusing boarding because she's a fraud," Marcus shouted, losing his cool. "Get her out of here so we can depart. We are burning fuel." The pressure was on the officer. The captain of the flight is the ultimate authority on the aircraft. If the pilot says you don't fly, you don't fly. Even if the pilot is wrong, the law usually sides with the crew in the moment to prevent delays. "Ma'am, you need to come with us," the officer said, reaching for her arm. "We can sort this out at the desk." Ilara took a half step back. "Do not touch me. I will walk." She looked Marcus dead in the eyes. The silence between them was heavy, electric. "You are making a mistake, Captain Thorne," she said softly. "A very expensive mistake." Marcus scoffed, adjusting his hat. "The only mistake was thinking you could hustle me. Get her out of my face." Ilara turned around. She saw the faces of the other passengers. Some looked pitying. Some looked smug, happy that the troublemaker was being removed. A young teenager was filming the entire thing on his phone. Good, Ilara thought. Get the angles. She walked back up the jet bridge, flanked by police. It was a walk of shame, designed to humiliate her. But Ilara wasn't humiliated. She was calculating. As they exited back into the terminal, the gate agent, Greg, looked at her with wide eyes. He had the passenger manifest on his screen. He had seen the VIP flag next to Ilara's name, but he had been too scared of Marcus to speak up. "I'm so sorry," Greg whispered as she passed the desk. Ilara paused. She looked at the name tag. Greg. Senior agent. "Greg," she said, her voice cutting through the noise of the terminal. "Don't close the flight yet. Keep the door open for 3 more minutes." "I can't, ma'am. The captain." 3 minutes, she commanded. It was the voice of a CEO. "And give me your phone." "My phone?" "I need to make a call on a landline, or an internal line. My cell signal is jammed in this terminal." She pointed to the red phone behind the desk, the one used for direct lines to operations control. The police officer stepped in. "Ma'am, you're not authorized." Ilara whipped out a black card from her pocket. It wasn't a credit card. It was a heavy titanium ID card with the Stratosphere Airlines logo and a gold chip. It simply said, "Board level clearance." The officer froze. Greg's jaw dropped. "I am not a passenger," Ilara said, her voice rising so the surrounding crowd could hear. "I am the CEO of this airline, and I need that phone." She picked up the receiver before anyone could stop her. She didn't dial customer service. She dialed the direct line to the Chief of Operations at Stratosphere HQ. "This is Ilara Vance, authorization code Alpha-7 Zulu. I have a code red at JFK Gate 42. Ground flight 882 immediately. Do not let that plane push back. And get the Director of Flight Standards on the line, now." Back on the plane, Marcus Thorne was buckling himself into the pilot's seat. He felt a rush of adrenaline. He had protected his ship. He had kept the standards high. "Door closed?" he asked the lead flight attendant. "Closed and armed, Captain," she replied, though she looked uneasy. "Good." "Requesting pushback," Marcus said into his headset. The tower responded instantly, but not with the clearance he expected. "Stratosphere 882, hold position. Repeat, hold position. Pushback clearance denied." Marcus frowned. "Tower, this is 882. We are buttoned up and on time. What's the delay?" 882, we have a stop order from Company HQ. You were ordered to return to the gate and shut down engines. Law enforcement is inbound." Marcus felt a cold drop of sweat slide down his back. Law enforcement. "I just removed the problem." "Negative, 882. The stop order came from the top. They said the CEO is at the gate, and she's been denied boarding." Marcus Thorne's heart stopped. The blood drained from his face so fast he felt dizzy. He looked out the side window. Standing at the window of the terminal, looking straight at the cockpit, was the woman in the hoodie. She was holding a phone to her ear, and she was smiling. The silence in the cockpit of Flight 882 was absolute, save for the whirring of avionics fans that suddenly seemed deafeningly loud. Captain Marcus Thorne stared at the side window, his eyes fixed on the terminal glass. He could see the figure of the woman in the gray hoodie. She wasn't looking at him anymore. She was looking at her phone, issuing commands that were dismantling his reality. First Officer David Chen, who had spent the last 2 years terrified of Marcus, slowly pulled his hands away from the controls. He knew the protocol for a, quote, company stop order, initiated by a C-suite executive. It was the aviation equivalent of a nuclear option. "Captain," David said, his voice barely a whisper, "Tower is requesting confirmation that we are shutting down engines." Marcus couldn't speak. His throat felt fused shut. The adrenaline that had fueled his arrogant power trip minutes ago had curdled into icy, paralyzing terror. He had just kicked the CEO of Stratosphere Airlines off her own plane, accused her of fraud, and called the police on her. He didn't just step on a landmine. He had jumped onto it with both feet. "Captain Thorne?" the tower queried again, sharper this time. "Shut them down," Marcus croaked. He slumped back into his seat, the expensive lambswool uniform suddenly feeling like a straitjacket. "Tell ground crew to reconnect the jet bridge." The humiliation began instantly. In the cabin, the flight attendants, led by Jessica, were confused. They had just secured the cabin for takeoff. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus's voice wavered slightly over the PA system, lacking its usual booming baritone. We have been ordered by company headquarters to return to the gate for an administrative issue. We apologize for the delay. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." A groan went through the cabin. The businessman in the beige coat in 1B huffed loudly. "Unbelievable. First the riffraff. Now this. I'm going to miss my connection." As the massive Boeing 777 was towed slowly back to Gate 42, the atmosphere inside the terminal was undergoing a radical shift. The moment Ilara Vance revealed her titanium ID, the energy around Gate 42 changed from chaotic bureaucracy to military precision. The Port Authority officers, realizing they had almost arrested one of the most powerful women in transportation based on the word of a biased pilot, immediately holstered their authority and became an honor guard. Greg, the gate agent, was pale and trembling as he handed Ilara the red landline phone. He looked like a man waiting for a firing squad. Ilara finished her call with operations. She hung up the phone slowly and turned to Greg. Her expression wasn't angry. It was one of profound, disappointing calm. "Greg," she said, "how long have you worked for Stratosphere?" 8 years, Ms. Vance. Ms. CEO, ma'am." "In those 8 years, how many times has Captain Thorne denied boarding to a passenger based on their appearance?" Greg swallowed hard. He looked at his shoes, then at the floor, then finally met her eyes. The fear of Marcus was gone, replaced by the terrifying reality of the person standing in front of him. "Too many times to count, ma'am. He calls it curating the cabin. If he doesn't like the look of someone in first, he finds a reason. Usually we just rebook them to avoid a scene. We are afraid of him. He writes people up for incompetence if they question him." Ilara nodded slowly. "Thank you for your honesty, Greg. You're not in trouble. But the culture that allowed you to be afraid of a pilot instead of prioritizing customer dignity, that ends today." The jet bridge groaned as it reconnected to the aircraft door. The sound echoed through the terminal like a dungeon door slamming shut. Ilara didn't reboard immediately. She stood at the end of the jet bridge, flanked by 2 police officers who were now there to ensure her orders were followed. She watched the aircraft door open. Jessica, the young flight attendant, opened the door, expecting a maintenance crew. Instead, she saw her new CEO, hoodie and all, standing with an aura of absolute authority that made the air crackle. "Ms. Vance?" Jessica stammered, recognizing her from the internal company announcement videos. "Good morning," Ilara said, stepping across the threshold onto the plane. "Please inform Captain Thorne that I am aboard, and then I need the public address system interphone." Jessica nodded frantically and practically ran to the cockpit. Ilara didn't go to seat 1A. She walked to the front galley, stood by the main cabin door, and picked up the interphone handset. She pressed the button to address the entire aircraft. Inside the cockpit, Jessica opened the door. "Captain, she's on board. She wants you, and she's on the PA." Marcus closed his eyes. He heard the click of the speakers throughout the plane, followed by a voice that was calm, articulate, and terrifyingly familiar. "Good morning, everyone." Ilara's voice rang out, clear and poised. "My name is Ilara Vance. Some of you may have seen me in the news recently. I am the new Chief Executive Officer of Stratosphere Airlines." A gasp rippled through the first-class cabin. The businessman in 1B dropped his phone. "I want to personally apologize for the significant delay and the return to the gate." Ilara continued. "This flight was halted because, minutes ago, the captain of this vessel, Marcus Thorne, attempted to have me arrested and removed from the plane. He did this because he decided that a black woman wearing a hoodie did not belong in a first-class seat, despite holding a full-fare ticket. The silence on the plane was so intense you could hear the air conditioning compressors humming. Captain Thorne deemed my presence a security threat, based solely on my appearance and his own prejudice. As CEO, I refuse to let this aircraft depart under the command of a pilot who lacks the basic judgment, professionalism, and respect for humanity required to wear that uniform." Marcus listened, his world crumbling around him with every word she spoke. "We will be deplaning shortly. You will all receive full refunds and significant compensation for this ordeal. A new flight crew is being assembled now, but before you leave, there's one piece of business we must conclude." Ilara paused, letting the weight of the moment hang in the air. "Captain Marcus Thorne, please exit the cockpit and meet me in the forward galley immediately." The walk from the cockpit door to the forward galley was less than 10 feet, but for Marcus Thorne it felt like walking the Green Mile. Every eye in the first-class cabin was fixed on the cockpit door. The passengers who had previously looked at him with reverence now looked at him with a mixture of morbid curiosity and disdain. The teenager who had filmed the initial encounter was now holding his phone up high, capturing the sequel. Marcus stood up. His legs felt unsteady. He adjusted his hat, a reflex action that now felt ridiculous. He looked at David Chen. The first officer was studiously examining a checklist, refusing to make eye contact. The allegiance of the cockpit had already shifted. Marcus opened the door and stepped out. The bright galley light seemed harsher than usual. Ilara Vance was standing there, leaning casually against a metal cart used for duty-free sales. She hadn't removed her hoodie. The contrast between her casual attire and Marcus's immaculate, gold-braided uniform was stark, symbolizing the complete overturning of the established hierarchy. Marcus stopped 3 feet in front of her. He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to offer a sanitized apology, perhaps to double down on his security defense. But Ilara held up a hand. "Save it," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was razor-sharp. "Anything you say right now is just going to make the transcription of this event look worse for you." "Ms. Vance," Marcus began, trying to regain some shred of dignity, "I was following protocol. You refused to identify yourself properly. You were combative. My primary responsibility is the safety of this aircraft." Ilara stared at him. It wasn't a glare. It was the clinical assessment of a surgeon looking at a tumor. "Safety," she repeated. "You think safety is judging a passenger by their clothes? You think safety is escalating a non-issue into a police incident because your ego couldn't handle a woman telling you to move out of the way? You didn't see a safety threat, Marcus. You saw a person you felt was beneath you, daring to occupy a space you think belongs to people like you." She pulled out her phone and tapped the screen, turning it around to face him. It was the video recorded by the teenager, already uploaded to Twitter. It had 50,000 views in 20 minutes. The hashtag Stratosphere Racist was already trending. "This is the safety you provided," Ilara said, gesturing to the video where Marcus was sneering about riffraff. "You've just vaporized about $50 million in brand value in under an hour, and you did it while on the clock, wearing my company's uniform." Marcus looked at the video. He saw himself. Arrogant, dismissive, cruel. It looked different seeing it from the outside. It looked ugly. "I didn't know who you were," he muttered. It was the weakest defense possible, and he knew it as soon as he said it. Ilara actually laughed, a short, humorless sound. "That's the point, Marcus. You shouldn't have to know I'm the CEO to treat me with basic human dignity. You should treat the grandmother in 34B saving up for her first trip to Europe with the same respect you treat the senator in 1A. If your respect is conditional on status, you have none to give." She stepped closer to him, dropping her voice so only he and the nearby flight attendants, who were pretending to be invisible, could hear. "I booked this flight to audit the passenger experience. I expected bad coffee. I expected delays. I didn't expect to find a cancer in the cockpit." She reached into her duffel bag and pulled out a manila folder. She handed it to him. Marcus numbly took the folder. He opened it. It wasn't about today. It was his complete HR file. It detailed 4 previous incidents over the last 5 years. A Sikh man removed because his turban made Marcus, quote, uncomfortable. A Hispanic family moved to the back of the plane because their children were too loud before the plane even finished boarding. 2 female flight attendants who had filed formal complaints about demeaning and sexist language in the cockpit, complaints that had been marked, resolved, pilot counseled, by the previous regime. "You've been protected for a long time," Ilara said. "Because you fly the big metal well, the old boys club looked the other way. They buried these complaints. But I'm the one holding the shovel now." Marcus looked up from the file, sweat beading on his forehead beneath his hat. "What does this mean?" "It means this plane is now a boardroom," Ilara said, "and you are facing an immediate disciplinary hearing." She turned to Jessica, the lead flight attendant. "Jessica, please escort the first-class passengers off the plane. Then I need you, the rest of the cabin crew, and First Officer Chen to assemble in the first-class cabin. We are going to have a meeting. Captain Thorne will wait in the cockpit until called." It was total emasculation. He was being sent to his room while the adults talked. As Marcus turned to slink back into the cockpit, he caught the eye of the businessman in 1B, who was gathering his things. The businessman looked at Marcus with unmasked disgust. The illusion of the Golden Captain was shattered. Marcus Thorne was just a man in a fancy suit about to lose everything. The atmosphere inside the first-class cabin of Flight 882 had undergone a terrifying transmutation. Only 20 minutes ago, it had been a sanctuary of soft lighting, the clink of crystal glassware, and the smell of expensive perfume. Now, it felt like a cold, sterile operating theater. The silence was absolute. broken only by the low, rhythmic thrum of the auxiliary power unit, APU, keeping the lights on. It was a sound that usually comforted passengers, but now it sounded like a countdown. Alara Vance sat in seat 1A. She didn't look like a passenger anymore. Despite the hoodie, despite the sneakers, she sat with the posture of a monarch on a throne. On the tray table in front of her, usually reserved for warm nuts and champagne, sat her laptop, its camera lens staring out at the empty cabin like an unblinking eye. On the screen, two faces were visible via a high-definition video link to Stratosphere's headquarters in Chicago, diverse, serious, and terrifyingly silent. It was the General Counsel, a man known as the Wolf, and the Vice President of Human Resources. They weren't speaking, they were waiting. Alara looked up at the row across from her. Jessica, the lead flight attendant, was wringing her hands so hard her knuckles were white. First Officer David Chen sat next to her, staring at the carpet pattern as if it contained the secrets of the universe. They looked like children called to the principal's office, terrified that the wrath about to be unleashed might splash onto them. "This meeting is officially in session," Alara said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it possessed a crystalline clarity that cut through the recycled air. "We are here to review the immediate conduct and historical performance of Captain Marcus Thorne. The time is 9:15 a.m. She turned the laptop slightly so the camera captured the crew. "I want the truth," Alara said, her eyes locking onto Jessica. "Not the sanitized version you put in the mandatory reports. Not the version you tell the union representative to avoid trouble. I want the version that keeps you awake at night. Speak." Jessica flinched. She looked at the cockpit door, which was currently closed, housing the predator who had ruled her work life for 6 months. "He calls us the help," Jessica whispered, her voice trembling. "Speak up, Jessica," Alara commanded gently but firmly. "The General Counsel needs to hear this." Jessica took a shaky breath, tears welling in her eyes. "Captain Thorne tells the flight attendants that our only job is to look pretty and keep the coffee hot. If we question a safety protocol, or if we ask about a delay, he writes us up for insubordination. He told me last week that if I didn't smile more when I brought him his meal, he'd make sure I was transferred to the red-eye routes out of Newark for the next 5 years. The VP of HR on the screen began typing furiously. "And today?" Alara asked. "Today?" Jessica wiped a tear. "He told me not to touch the center console because I might break it. He said the coffee tasted like sludge. He treats the plane like it's his private living room and we're just intruders." Alara nodded slowly. She turned her gaze to David Chen. The first officer was a capable pilot, but he had the beaten-down demeanor of a man who had been psychologically conditioned to stay silent. "First Officer Chen," Alara said. "You share a cockpit with him. You are the second in command. Tell me about the culture on the flight deck." David looked up. He saw the face of the CEO. He realized that the reign of terror was actually, finally cracking. "It's not a partnership, ma'am," David said, his voice gaining strength. "It's a dictatorship. Captain Thorne refers to crew resource management training as woke nonsense. He disables the caution alerts because he says the noise distracts him from his music." Alara's eyebrows shot up. "He plays music during critical phases of flight." "Opera?" David confirmed. "He blasts opera during taxi and takeoff. If I ask him to turn it down so I can hear the tower, he tells me to. Clean the wax out of my ears. But it's worse than that." David paused, glancing at the empty seat where the businessman in the beige coat had sat. "He profiles the passengers, Ms. Vance. He keeps a tally. He calls it the trash index. If he sees too many people in hoodies or people with accents or people who look like you in the priority lane, he gets angry. He says it ruins the aesthetic of his ship. He told me this morning, when he saw you, that he wasn't going to let a ghetto lottery winner sit in 1A. On the screen, the General Counsel's face went pale. That phrase alone was a multi-million-dollar lawsuit waiting to happen. "Thank you, David," Alara said softly. "That is all I needed." She closed the laptop screen slightly, just enough to hide the executives, but keep the audio line open. Bring him in." Jessica stood up, her legs shaking, and went to the cockpit door. She knocked. "Captain, she wants to see you." A moment later, the door swung open. Marcus Thorne stepped out. He had spent the last 20 minutes in the cockpit trying to convince himself this was a misunderstanding. He had checked his reflection, smoothed his silver hair, and adjusted his tie. He walked into the first-class cabin with a forced smile, attempting to summon the charisma that had saved him so many times before. But the air in the cabin choked the smile right off his face. He saw his crew sitting like a jury. He saw Alara Vance, the hoodie woman, sitting in the seat of judgment. "Miss Vance," Marcus began, his voice booming with a false joviality. "Look, I think we got off on the wrong foot. It's a high-stress environment. Security protocols are tight, and—" "Sit down, Marcus," Alara said. She didn't point to a first-class seat. She pointed to the jump seat near the galley door, the uncomfortable, fold-down seat used by crew members during takeoff. Marcus blinked. "I'd prefer to stand." "It wasn't a request," Alara said. Marcus hesitated, his face flushing a deep mottled red. He slowly lowered himself onto the small, hard jump seat. It forced him to look up at Alara, physically lowering his status. "I have just spent the last 10 minutes listening to your crew describe a working environment that sounds less like a modern airline and more like a feudal system," Alara said, leaning forward. "Safety violations, intimidation, gross negligence, and systemic, vitriolic racism." "That's a lie," Marcus snapped, pointing a finger at David. "Chen is incompetent. He's trying to save his own skin. I run a tight ship." Alara didn't flinch. She simply turned her laptop screen around so Marcus could see the video recording playing there. It was the teenager's video from the jet bridge. Marcus watched himself. He saw the sneer. He heard the way he said, "You don't belong here." He saw the sheer, unadulterated ugliness of his own ego projected in 4K resolution. "You didn't see a security threat, Marcus," Alara said, her voice dropping to a whisper that was louder than a scream. "You saw a mirror reflecting your own insecurities. You saw a black woman in a hoodie, and you thought, 'I can crush her.' You thought your 4 stripes gave you the power of a god." She stood up, closing the distance between them. "But you forgot who builds the temples, Marcus. You forgot who signs the checks. You are not a god. You are a service provider. And you have failed to provide the most basic service of all, human decency." Marcus looked around the cabin. He looked at Jessica, who was no longer looking at the floor. She was looking at him with pity. He looked at David, who met his gaze with a steely resolve. He realized, with a sickening lurch in his stomach, that his allies were gone. The old boys' club wasn't on this flight. "Miss Vance?" Marcus stammered, his voice cracking, sounding suddenly very old. "I have a pension. I have 3 years left until retirement. If you do this, if you fire me for cause, I lose everything." Alara looked at him. For a second, there was a flicker of humanity in her eyes. Not forgiveness, but the heavy burden of execution. "You lost everything the moment you decided that your prejudice was more important than your profession," she said. She reached into her bag and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It had been printed by the gate agent moments ago and brought to the plane. "This is a formal notice of termination," Alara stated. "Effective immediately. You are being relieved of command for gross misconduct, discriminatory behavior, and creating a hostile work environment." She held out her hand, palm open. "Your wings, Mr. Thorne, and your ID." The silence stretched for 10 seconds, an eternity. Marcus stared at her hand. To give up his wings was to admit defeat. It was to admit that he, Captain Marcus Thorne, had been bested by the woman in the hoodie. His hand shook violently as he reached up to his chest. He unpinned the gold wings, the symbol of his identity for 30 years. The pin pricked his finger, drawing a tiny drop of blood, a final sting of reality. He placed the wings in Alara's hand. Then, he pulled his ID lanyard from his neck and dropped it on top of the wings. He felt naked. He felt small. "David," Alara said, turning to the first officer. David Chen stood up. He seemed to grow 3 inches taller in that moment. He adjusted his uniform, which was impeccable. "Yes, ma'am." "You are now acting captain of this vessel," Ilara declared. "Please escort Mr. Thorne off the aircraft. Ensure he is handed over to the Port Authority police waiting on the jet bridge. He is not to re-enter the secure area." "Understood," David said. David walked over to Marcus. He didn't shout. He didn't gloat. He simply gestured toward the open cabin door with a professional coolness that Marcus had never possessed. "Let's go, Marcus," David said. He didn't call him captain, just Marcus. Marcus Thorne stood up from the jump seat. He looked at Ilara one last time, searching for a reprieve, a joke. Just kidding. He found only the resolute face of the future. He turned and walked down the aisle of the empty first-class cabin. The leather seats seemed to mock him. The fresh orchids seemed to wilt as he passed. He stepped across the threshold, out of the plane, and into the cold, gray tunnel of the jet bridge where the police were waiting. Behind him, Ilara Vance let out a long breath she had been holding for an hour. She looked at Jessica and David. "Close the door," Ilara said. "We have a plane to prepare." The rain outside JFK Terminal 4 had turned into a torrential downpour, a fitting backdrop for Marcus Thorne's exit. He didn't leave through the VIP lane. He didn't walk with the swagger of a man who owned the sky. Escorted by Port Authority police, he was guided out a side door near the baggage claim, stripped of his credentials, his wings, and his dignity. He hailed a yellow taxi, the action feeling foreign to a man who hadn't driven himself or taken public transit from an airport in 15 years. Usually, a black town car with a driver named Silvio was waiting for him. Today, he sat in the back of a damp cab that smelled of stale pine air freshener and wet wool. "Where to, pal?" the driver asked, eyeing him in the rearview mirror. "Queens," Marcus muttered, giving the address of his crash pad, an investment apartment he kept empty, usually for tax purposes. He couldn't go home to Connecticut. His wife didn't know yet, but she would soon. Marcus pulled out his phone. His hands were shaking so badly he dropped it twice. When he finally unlocked the screen, the notification center was a solid wall of alerts. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn. It was a digital avalanche. The video titled, "Racist Pilot Tries to Kick CEO Off Plane," was everywhere. It wasn't just a clip. It was a phenomenon. The footage of him blocking Ilara, sneering about riffraff, and then the devastating cut to Ilara revealing her identity, was playing on a loop on CNN in the taxi's partition screen. "Hey," the taxi driver said, squinting at the screen and then back at the mirror. "Ain't that you? You're that guy, the one who hates hoodies." Marcus sank lower in his seat, pulling his trenchcoat collar up. "Just drive." By the time he reached the apartment, the view count had surpassed 12 million. Stratosphere Airlines. Stock had initially plummeted 8% in pre-market trading, panic gripping the shareholders. The board was in a frenzy, but Ilara Vance was calm. She knew that to rebuild the house, you first have to demolish the rotting foundation. At 2 p.m., Ilara held a press conference in the main atrium of JFK. The press pool was the largest the airport had seen in a decade. Ilara stepped onto the podium. She hadn't changed into a power suit. She was still wearing the charcoal cashmere hoodie, but she had thrown a sharp, black blazer over it. It was a visual manifesto. I can be comfortable, and I can be the boss. Today, Stratosphere Airlines failed, Ilara began, her voice echoing through the silent atrium. She looked directly into the camera lenses. A paying customer was profiled, harassed, and denied service because she didn't fit a pilot's outdated, prejudiced definition of worthy. That customer happened to be me. But let me be clear, if I had been a student, a grandmother, or a tourist, the injustice would have been exactly the same. She paused, letting the flashbulbs pop. Captain Marcus Thorne has been terminated for cause, effective immediately. But firing one man is not a solution. It is merely a start. We have harbored a culture of arrogance for too long. We have allowed legacy to become a shield for bad behavior. Starting tomorrow, Stratosphere is initiating a complete external audit of all HR complaints from the last 10 years. Anyone found to have covered up discrimination will follow Captain Thorne out the door. The internet exploded. The hoodie CEO became an instant icon. Within hours, the narrative shifted from stratosphere is racist to stratosphere is cleaning house. The stock didn't just recover. It closed up 4% as investors rallied behind the decisive leadership. For Marcus Thorne, however, the nightmare was just beginning. The hard karma Alara had promised arrived in waves. The first wave was professional. 2 days after the incident, Marcus called his union representative, a man he had known for 20 years. "I can't help you, Mark," the representative said, his voice cold. "You violated 6 different federal regulations and the company's code of conduct on 4K video. The union isn't going to burn capital defending a PR disaster. You're on your own." The second wave was personal. Marcus called Jessica, his mistress in London, hoping for sympathy. The number was disconnected. When he checked her Instagram, he saw she had posted a selfie, wearing a gray hoodie, with the caption, "Team Ilara. Knowing your worth means cutting out the toxicity." She had blocked him on everything. The final wave was financial. With his salary zeroed out and a, quote, termination for gross misconduct on his record, his severance package was non-existent. The flight industry is a small village. Word traveled fast. Marcus applied to Delta, United, American, even the budget carriers he used to mock. The rejection emails were automated and instant. 6 months later, the man who used to dine at the Shard was standing in a humid, windowless room in a strip mall near Orlando, Florida. "All right, listen up," Marcus barked, trying to summon his old command. He was wearing a polo shirt that was too tight, sweat staining the armpits. He was now a simulator instructor for a pay-to-fly cadet school, a place where desperate students paid thousands to log hours. "You're coming in too steep on the approach," Marcus yelled at the student, a 19-year-old kid chewing gum. The kid didn't flinch. He just looked at Marcus, then at the iPad on his lap. "Chill out, dude. It's a simulator. And aren't you the guy from YouTube, the one who got owned by the black lady?" The other student in the back of the simulator snickered. Marcus froze. He opened his mouth to scream, to fire them, to assert his dominance. But then he remembered. He had no power. He was making $22 an hour. If he lost this job, he wouldn't be able to make rent on his studio apartment. "Just watch your altitude," Marcus whispered, defeated. He stared at the fake digital horizon, realizing he would never touch the real sky again. Meanwhile, at 35,000 feet, the real sky was looking brighter than ever. Flight 882 to London was boarding at Gate 42. The atmosphere was unrecognizable compared to that rainy Tuesday in November. The gate area was buzzing with energy. The staff looked lighter, happier. Greg, the gate agent who had once been terrified to speak, was laughing with a family as he scanned their passports. He saw a familiar figure approaching the priority lane and straightened up. Not out of fear, but out of genuine respect. Alara Vance was back. She was wearing a tailored navy suit this time, sharp and professional, but she still carried the battered leather duffel bag on her shoulder, a reminder of where she came from. "Good morning, Ms. Vance," Greg beamed. "We have everything ready for you, and we're running 5 minutes ahead of schedule." "That's what I like to hear, Greg." Ilara smiled, pausing to check the screen. "Who's in command today?" "Captain Jenkins," Greg said proudly. "She's fantastic. One of the pilots you reinstated after the audit." Ilara nodded, satisfied. She walked down the jet bridge, the sound of her heels clicking on the metal floor echoing like a victory march. At the aircraft door, Captain Sarah Jenkins was waiting. She was a woman in her 40s who had been stalled at the rank of first officer for a decade under the old boys club regime. Now she wore 4 stripes. "Welcome aboard, ma'am," Captain Jenkins said, offering a firm handshake. "The flight plan is filed. Smooth air all the way to Heathrow." "I trust you completely, Captain," Ilara replied. Ilara moved into the cabin. She didn't have to fight for her spot this time. She didn't have to prove she belonged. She placed her bag in the overhead bin and settled into SEAT 1A. As the plane pushed back from the gate, Ilara looked out the window. She saw the ground crew waving the wands, the baggage handlers giving thumbs up. The toxic cloud that had hung over Stratosphere had lifted. She thought about Marcus Thorne for a fleeting second, a ghost of the past, a necessary casualty in the war for respect. He was likely in a dark room somewhere, shouting at a screen. She was here, in the light, taking her airline into a new era. The engines roared to life, a deep, powerful hum that vibrated through the floorboards. Ilara Vance closed her eyes, took a sip of the pre-departure champagne, which was excellent, and smiled. They were finally cleared for takeoff. And that, my friends, is why you never, ever judge a book by its cover, especially when that book might just own the entire library. Marcus Thorne let his ego and his prejudice write a check that his career couldn't cash, and the karma was swift, brutal, and absolutely deserved. If you enjoyed this story of instant justice and a CEO who wasn't afraid to get in the trenches, smash that like button right now. It really helps the channel. And if you want more incredible saga stories like this, where the arrogant get what's coming to them, hit subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Let me know in the comments, what would you have done if you were Ilara Vance? Would you have fired him on the spot or given him a second chance? Let's argue about it down below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.